Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Columbus of Radio America and Jim Garrity of National Review. 3 Martinis coming up.
Hey, so glad you're with us for the Monday edition, the President's Day edition of the Three Martini Lunch. Jim Garrity is away today, and as we said on Friday, for the next couple of weeks. If you read the Morning Jolt, he's dropping pretty big clues for you on where he is, and when he comes back, we'll have a full vetting of his travels. In his place today, Scott Bertram, General Manager, WRFH, Radio Free Hillsdale, 101.7 FM, on the campus of Hillsdale College. Scott is also a lecturer in journalism there. He directs the Hillsdale College Podcast Network and hosts the Radio Free Hillsdale Hour, among other college-affiliated podcasts. And in his free time, because somehow there is some, he is the co-host of the Political Beats podcast, and also, very timely for today, Wasn't That Special? 50 years of Saturday Night Live. And of course, last night was the big 50th anniversary special on NBC. And we'll talk a little bit about that towards the end of the podcast today. So Scott, great to have you with us again. We've got a full slate today, given the fact that we've got a lot of CBS stepping on rakes to talk about today, some good news at the border, and a whole lot more.
Indeed. Great to be here. Appreciate it. Up late last night for the SNL special, yes, but it filled that void in life that the NFL had previously, right? We've got this little area here between the Super Bowl and March Madness where we got to find something to do on Sundays. So yesterday was make fun of CBS, watch SNL. Worked out just fine.
Yes, exactly right. So CBS News has not had a good several months here. They had the whole 60 Minutes egregiously edited interview of Kamala Harris. Then there was Norah O'Donnell and Margaret Brennan hosting the vice presidential debate with a serious thumb on the scale against J.D. Vance, but J.D. Vance still mopped the floor with Tim Walz. But yesterday was just a tour de force of horrible journalism over at CBS. We got to start, though, at the end of last week. A couple of quick clips from J.D. Vance as he spoke at the Munich Security Conference, where he's talking about how Europe is eroding when it comes to the rights for free speech. Here's a couple of quick clips.
I look to Brussels, where EU commissars warn citizens that they intend to shut down social media during times of civil unrest the moment they spot what they've judged to be, quote, hateful content. Or to this very country, where police have carried out raids against citizens suspected of posting anti-feminist comments online as part of, quote, combating misogyny on the internet, a day of action.
He then talked about the UK prosecuting people for praying silently 50 yards away from the entrance to an abortion clinic, and Scotland actually telling people, hey, you live in safe zones near abortion clinics, and even the conduct you do privately in your home could be grounds for prosecution, which led to this closing comment in that section.
In Britain and across Europe, free speech, I fear, is in retreat.
Well, because he wants free speech throughout Germany, that means he also wants political speech from parties that the more established parties don't like. And that came up with Margaret Brennan on Face the Nation with Secretary of State Marco Rubio. And Margaret Brennan's grasp of history, particularly World War II history, not the strongest.
Well, he was standing in a country where free speech was weaponized to conduct a genocide. And he met with the head of a political party that has far-right views and some historic ties to extreme groups. The context of that was changing the tone of it. And you know that the censorship was specifically about the right.
No, I have to disagree with you. Free speech was not used to conduct a genocide. The genocide was conducted by an authoritarian Nazi regime that happened to also be genocidal because they hated Jews and they hated minorities and they hated those that they had a list of people they hated, but primarily the Jews. There was no free speech in Nazi Germany. There was none. There was also no opposition in Nazi Germany. They were a sole and only party that governed that country. So that's not an accurate reflection of history.
Scott, I would argue that it's exactly the opposite. Is why the Holocaust and the rise of Nazism happened. There wasn't free speech. All contrary speech was clamped down on. But CBS wasn't done for the day. I don't know. They're just getting warmed up because on 60 Minutes, they did a report basically glorifying the German crackdown on free speech. And so here's what that looked like.
While America is relaxing policies around social media and the internet, Germany is cracking down. We were with the German police as they conducted early morning raids on citizens who'd been accused of hate speech, threats, and inciting violence online. In the United States, a lot of people look at this and say this is restricting free speech. It's a threat to democracy.
Free speech needs boundaries.
But they weren't done yet.
Is it a crime to insult somebody in public?
Yes.
Yes, it is.
And it's a crime to insult them online as well?
Yes.
The fine could be even higher
Yeah.
if you insult someone in the internet.
Why?
Because in internet, it stays there. If we are talking here face to face, you insult me, I insult you, okay, finish. But if you're in the internet, if I insult you or a politician...
That sticks around forever.
Yeah.
The prosecutors explain German law also prohibits the spread of malicious gossip, violent threats, and fake quotes. If somebody posts something that's not true, and then somebody else reposts it or likes it, are they committing a crime?
Yeah, in the case of reposting, it is a crime as well, because the reader can't distinguish whether you just invented this or just reposted it. That's the same for us.
The punishment for breaking hate speech laws can include jail time for repeat offenders. But in most cases, a judge levies a stiff fine and sometimes keeps their devices. How do people react when you take their phones from them?
They are shocked. It's a kind of punishment if you lose your smartphone. It's even worse than the fine you have to pay.
Because your whole life is typically on your phone now.
Scott, there's nothing more reassuring than people with German accents telling you what you can and can't say and punishing you severely if they don't like what you say. So, we saw the fringes of this, certainly when Twitter wasn't in the hands of Elon Musk and the government was telling it what posts to throttle or to take down or to suspend and so forth. And so J.D. Vance was clearly over the target since CBS clearly had this report ready to go long before he made that speech. So just amazing that we're now defending crackdowns on free speech.
It is, in a way. It is not if you've been following. This doesn't exist in a vacuum. And if you've been following, watching the left, and shockingly many parts of the media over the past certainly months, but much further than that too, it shouldn't be all that surprising that there's this cheerleading going on about what's happening in Germany. And it's so odd that they reacted so vociferously to the vice president's comments, knowing, as you point out, this was coming like the next day. It's so silly. But it's the whole idea, and I just talked to someone about this, that speech is violence, right? Speech is violence. Something I say can literally harm you, and yet violence is not violence, right? What happens on college campuses, the anti-Semitic attacks, so it's not a big deal. It's not real. You don't have to worry about that. The things you say, though, that's actual violence. You're weaponizing words, and we need some sort of an official crackdown on all those sorts of things. There is palpable fear, both on the left and in the mainstream media, that they're losing the monopoly on the way people ingest information. And it's scary. It's scary for both of them because for decades and decades, they've been able to have the last word on virtually every issue. And even when, say, the online blogs and even, conservative magazines began publishing online and sort of taking that middleman away, they still had the last word. They still had the ability to influence people in the nightly news. They still had this ability to reach people in a way that on a mass basis that others did not. That's all changing very quickly. And you see the reaction to podcasts and Joe Rogan and the ability for people to have free exchanges of information. And this is scary. And we've got to build something against him. We have to have a bulwark against what's happening on the right. And they've figured out this cheat code that they can talk just directly to the people about issues. And that can't happen. It's all building toward what we're seeing. It's not out of nowhere. It doesn't exist in a vacuum. And to see 60 Minutes go on and really not devote a whole show, but there are other problems with last night's show, as we might talk about in a minute. But to see them sort of talk to these German prosecutors and smile and nod and say, people in the U.S. will find this strange and tell us why it's such a grand idea over in Germany, and sort of smiling and apply, we'll take away their devices. They don't get to have those anymore. We have not deemed them worthy or capable of having a device on which their whole life lives, as the CBS reporter points out. None of this should be terribly surprising, although the fact is coming from CBS, the Tiffany Network, and their premier news programs. That's wild.
It's only from the left's perspective that speech is violence. It's when when the right says something critical of the left, that is violence. When the left commits actual violence against the right, that is speech. And so, as you would, I'd say, I'm sure, and I certainly believe that the rantings of anti-Semites or neo-Nazis or whoever, that's all very repulsive stuff. But the solution to confronting it is more speech, confronting it and showing how hateful and evil and ugly and ignorant it is, rather than stifling it, because then people are wondering why you're stifling it. Interest will grow for the wrong reasons instead of people seeing how stupid it really is. So, yeah, and real quick, the other issue was interviewing people from the U.S. Agency for International Development who were fired last week. They said about 8,000 total, talking about how they were escorted out of the building. They made that sound sinister. Whenever you leave a government facility from employment perspective, you hand over your credentials and anything else you got from that employment, and they escort you out of the building. So that's not as sinister as it seems. And then there's also some question as to whether these people work directly for USAID. And so, as Eric Erickson said on Twitter, this is classic mainstream media, where if it's a Republican policy, you interview the victims, and if it's a Democratic policy, you interview the beneficiaries. So what was your quick take on that?
I thought about this morning, which is that, you remember when Democrats, I think this was just in the Biden administration, shutting down coal plants. May have gone back to Obama at this point. Time just moves so quickly. But the response was, learn to code, find a different job, do something different, go back to school, find a new skill. It's no big deal, right? And when this happens in the private sector, you have mass layoffs or companies have to shut down or reorganize. There's seemingly this understanding that, well, sure, there's no money. It's not successful. You can't continue doing business the way you have, and people are going to lose some jobs, and maybe they'll reorganize and get out of bankruptcy, but this is what happens. In the public sector, the assumption is that money is limitless. Why should anyone ever be fired? And everybody knows that the annual deficits we run at the federal level and the accumulating debt, and no one looks at that as being real. It's not a real number. It's not really happening. We can always get around it. There's ways to maneuver around it. We're running 2 trillion deficits every single year, and you have Elon Musk and Doge and President Trump trying to do something about it, and the reaction is not, hooray, finally, we might get this under control. We might turn things around. We might escape, a possible bankruptcy. Stop paying all these billions of dollars in interest on the debt. It's, oh my goodness, how could you possibly do this? We have all the money we could possibly need to pay people to do all the jobs we might possibly want them to do. It's silly. And so, as you said, go interview the victims and have them tell their sad stories, which of course are sad. It's sad when anyone loses a job. These particular people are not special, that they're not dealing with things that other people who have lost jobs in the past in the private sector aren't dealing with. It is just an extension of the desire that, again, this administrative state, this fourth unelected, unaccountable fourth branch of government that, as the ACLU said last week, exists to check the executive branch, which is like the silliest thing you've ever heard in your life.
It is the executive branch.
Right, it is the executive branch. But it's this effort to sort of see that exists in perpetuity and never slim down. And anytime there's a change at the top in terms of who actually is running the Oval Office and the executive branch, the people in those positions continue to do what they do forever. That is what's trying to be changed. And of course, that's why there's so much yelling and screaming about it.
Yes, exactly. There's so much waste at USAID has been documented in some of these other departments as well. So when you get rid of the programs that are wasteful, the people affiliated with those programs, you don't really have a place to put them. And so, unfortunately, they need to find other employment. It's not pleasant, but it's just a fact.
If you run a program that the head of the executive branch deems not essential anymore, what is supposed to happen? People lose jobs. No one delights in it, I don't think, other than the 50,000-foot perspective, which is that these things are necessary to get us back on firm fiscal footing. And that point of view is not necessarily represented anywhere.
I would use one word of caution for Elon Musk. Most people don't work 20 hours a day, 7 days a week. So as you're figuring out the appropriate size of the workforce, just keep that in mind.
If he's working 20 hours a day, we found out over the weekend what he's doing the other 4 hours that he's not working.
that is a whole soap opera that could potentially be a martini. It's probably too tabloidish for us, but if you don't know what we're talking about, just Google Elon and baby, and the rest will fill in all the details for you. But yeah, that was quite the saga over the weekend. This podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp, and you're several weeks into 2025 now, and hopefully you're on a good path for where you want to be at the end of the year. But if not, maybe it's time to find some professional help through BetterHelp. And some of that is just being in the right relationships. You hear all the time about the red flags, people you don't want to be around. What are some signs that the people you're confiding in that might not be the right people to be around? That's certainly an issue to deal with. But also, what are your green flags? Who are the people? What are the characteristics that you do want around you as you go through these important days of your life? And so if you haven't really sorted that out well in your life, try out BetterHelp. BetterHelp is fully online, making therapy affordable and convenient, serving more than 5 million people worldwide. You can access a diverse network of more than 30,000 credentialed therapists with a wide range of specialties, and you can easily switch therapists anytime at no cost. Discover your relationship green flags with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/3ML to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/3ML. All right, Scott, very quick good martini here, and this comes to us from border czar Tom Homan. He's been ubiquitous on media talking about the launch of the ICE raids as soon as Trump was sworn in. He's been updating us with numbers of deportations as well as numbers at the border, and he's been very, very prominent about plugging the leaks about where these ICE raids are going to happen. But his tweet out this morning, quote, "In the last 24 hours, the U.S. Border Patrol has encountered a total of 229 aliens across the entire southwest border. That is down from a high of over 11,000 a day under Biden." He says, "I started as a border agent in 1984, and I don't remember the numbers ever being that low. President Trump promised a secure border, and he is delivering." And so, Scott, it's amazing what happens in a couple different ways. First of all, you have the Border Patrol free to do its job now, but also you've completely yanked away the incentives for people to come here illegally, knowing that once they come here, they're going to get turned right around. And so while 11,000 is the worst case scenario, the numbers were well into the thousands over and over and over again throughout the 4 years of Joe Biden. And now the people know that if they come, they ain't staying, they're not coming. And that's why we get numbers this low.
You know, you think back to the Biden administration during the height of some of these activities, and you saw those surveillance videos right on the border or the Rio Grande River of nonstop flows coming across. And one of those videos, that's the total number that Tom Homan just referenced, like in one of those single little videos. That's it. That's all that happened in his report. It goes to show that, as many people said and believed, it was an enforcement question. It was a question of whether or not we wanted to stop this. And Joe Biden made a few minor moves close to the election to say numbers are coming down. And clearly with the election of Donald Trump and his rhetoric and his promises about what's happening at the border, that message is getting out, just like the message that the border was wide open was getting out, making its way down through Central and South America. And again, it's an example of a promise made and a promise kept. And the question now is, how far do you go? How quickly do you do it? Most of these early opinion polls on the president and his activities have this being a net positive. People agree with these maneuvers to secure the border. People agree with some of the deportations, certainly of criminals who are here in the United States. Can you get those efforts up and running here shortly and show people once again that what you promised on the campaign trail is what actually is being executed?
Yeah, well said. ABC News yesterday on This Week had the numbers, which shouldn't shock anyone. I mean, who wants criminal illegals living in their community unless you're really dedicated to chaos in this country? That was 60 plus saying that Trump was right to declare an emergency at the border, 60% plus saying that only girls should be playing in girls' sports. I mean, stuff that, 15, 20 years ago, was a 100-0 issue. Now it's an 80-20 issue, and Trump keeps mopping up on these things. And so this is excellent work so far. Hope we can keep it going. But yeah, as long as you can clamp down at the border, you're not making the problem worse while you try to round up and get rid of the worst elements of the people here illegally. So well done, Tom Homan, and all the people actually doing this work. And quickly in our third martini, also good. This is coming from Politico, who is still in business, given the numbers and money it's not getting from the USAID.
They'll continue to be in business, Greg, until you cancel your $10,000 subscription. You're helping keep Politico afloat, my friend.
Yes. Politico Pro is very similar to Hunter Biden artwork. Yes, you're technically paying for that, but that's not what you're really paying for. But anyway, they're basically saying here that the Democrats are conceding that, at least as of now, Republicans are, quote, running circles around them online as Trump remakes Washington. Elena Schneider with the story, and basically saying that Musk and X and the messaging here is so much better than what the Democrats have going. They talk about how the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, created its X account last November. It's got 4 million followers now. And obviously, its posts doing pretty well on the algorithm and getting a lot of attention. The Democratic National Committee started a rapid response account that has just a little over 120,000. And in addition to that, the only other Democratic resistance, quote unquote, has been these completely pathetic protests outside the Department of Education, Chuck Schumer holding up the avocado and the Corona and things like that, where even Jon Stewart is facepalming at how bad the Democratic messaging is here. And so they're basically saying Republicans, for the first time in my lifetime, Scott, have gotten the upper hand on the messaging war. They understand the media, particularly online media, better than the left does at this point. And until the left figures that out, those numbers we've been seeing in some of those polls aren't going to change.
Yes, this Politico piece is the whining about X accounts and whining about free speech and whining about the fact that the right can reach people in that manner and whining about podcasters who are successful, which of course is just the new whining about conservative talk radio and AM radio, which is successful. And so there's a lot of it in here. As you mentioned, though, there's an admission that Republicans and conservatives actually are getting it right this time. And this, again, goes back to that CBS story at the top that we talked about, which is if you make this admission, then the next step is either we got to fix ourselves or we got to shut down their ability to do so. And the fix ourselves wing is not winning right now. The other wing, we've got to do something to stop them, is perhaps more prevalent right now, because to fix it means you're going to have to make some people angry. That 15%, 10% of the overall electorate that polices language and polices phrases and gets very upset if anything from the official Democratic leadership is not of the most left possible message, and then whines, complains, protests, right? They still don't want to offend that portion of the base. And until they're willing to do that, it's not going to be possible to win back that middle, whatever, 20%, whatever we want to say it is, because the messaging that they need to make that very small slice happy on the far left is just poison to the middle of the country. Again, we have to think too hard about this. Democrats tried to make the entire election about he's a fascist, he's a dictator, he's going to kill democracy, lead to the end of the country. He's a terrible guy who was a felon. And I can't remember if it was Bill Maher, but no, it was Stephen A. Smith on Bill Maher, who was saying, look, the middle part of the electorate knew all this, saw all this, and still said, yeah, that's the guy. We know all that stuff. But you're talking about taxpayer money for transgender surgeries for criminals and people who are locked up behind bars, and that's even wilder than this guy who wrote down his expense for paying off the right. It didn't matter. It didn't matter because the other stuff was so crazy and so out there that they were willing to accept whatever flaws this guy had. And now he's in office and actually following through on a lot of the 80-20 issues that help put him in the presidency once again. And so for the moment, they don't really know what to do, right? And that's where they find themselves, which I'm happy to leave them in that space for a while. They have some time to figure things out. Politics moves fast. President Obama went from winning whatever percent of the vote to losing Scott Brown's Senate seat pretty quickly. So nothing's permanent. But at the moment, I would say they at least don't have an idea about how to flip things around.
There was a phrase in the first Trump administration referring to the Democrats of all they have to do is not be crazy, and they can't do it. I'm not even sure that would have stopped Trump in 2024 if they had been slightly less crazy, but they doubled down on crazy in a lot of different ways, and it caught up with them and cost them all 7 swing states and the popular vote and everything else. And so, Scott, just in our last couple of minutes here, as I mentioned at the outset, you're the co-host of Wasn't That Special? 50 years of Saturday Night Live. You and Christian have been dutifully going through the seasons here, building up to this moment. So last night was the big special, 3 hours plus on NBC, star-studded in so many different ways. I saw a pretty good-sized chunk of it. For me, the best part was the Adam Sandler 50 Years song, which was hilarious and also touching in a number of ways. Steve Martin, timeless, strong on the monologue and other moments.
He brought it. Steve Martin brought it last night. It's a fine monologue.
He's looked 75 for the last 35 years, but now he actually is in his late 70s. But what stood out to you most as someone who has dissected Saturday Night Live for half a century here?
Well, overall, it was the anniversary special. They had won 15, 25, 40, now 50. Least reliant on montages and clips from the past. And I think one of the reasons is because you had the 2 days prior to celebrate a lot of the musical acts and music on the show. And you had the Peacock streaming to take care of some of the looking way back. You can find all these clips on YouTube. And so this particular 50th anniversary show, there was a lot of actually, new content written, which is good, but also bad because it's hard to write new, funny content, especially on a very short week with people who probably don't want to do rehearsals at this stage in their careers. But I mean, that was certainly overall a change from past anniversary shows. There were 3 emotional tentpoles. You had the opening song from Paul Simon, Homeward Bound, which is a beautiful song. And as he mentioned, played it way back when in the 1976, I think, with George Harrison. Then the Sandler song in the middle, which was kind of for the audience, but also very much for the people involved with the show. The in-jokes, the references, and then the celebration of people who had been on the show for a while. And then McCartney closing things off with the back half of Abbey Road. And in between, you had a lot of great looks, and the focus was on the past 15, 20 years. You didn't see a ton from the original cast. You saw very little from that outstanding cast from 86 to 92-ish. Carvey didn't make an appearance at all. Lovitz just briefly. You saw it just, there's a lot for the past 10, 15 years, especially Fred Armisen, Jason Sudeikis, people like that, more recent hosts as well. You're always going to quibble with a few things and why didn't you do this and why didn't you include that? It's very hard to put this together, for 3 hours, 15 minutes, whatever it was last night. On the whole, I thought a very, very good job done by everyone. I thought that the John Mulaney New York tribute, taking it through the decades of New York City, was very Mulaney, not all that accessible, perhaps, for people who are just tuning in for this anniversary special. They also did a fantastic New York City tribute in the 40th anniversary show, and so I'm comparing this to that. I like the one from the 40th anniversary better. Great to see Eddie Murphy a couple of times, really stretch his legs comedically. That was fun. Will Ferrell was in a couple of places. So, I mean, I think a success for sure.
I think you and I would agree on when the heyday was, and there were certainly flashes of that. Eddie Murphy, fantastic as the doing the Tracy Morgan impression and so forth. And as mentioned, folks can subscribe and follow the work you're doing on that podcast at wasn'tthatspecial.com. Scott, thanks for being here today. We'll talk to you again soon.
My pleasure, Greg. Thank you.
Scott Bertram is the general manager of WRFH, Radio Free Hillsdale, 101.7 FM. He lectures in journalism at Hillsdale, directs the college's podcast network, hosts the Radio Free Hillsdale Hour, in addition to Political Beats and Wasn't That Special, 50 years of Saturday Night Live. I'm Greg Corumbus of Radio America. Thanks for being with us today. Please subscribe to the podcast if you don't already. Tell your friends about us as well. Thanks also for your 5-star ratings and your kind reviews. Please keep those coming. Get us on your home devices. All you have to say is play 3 Martini Lunch Podcast. Follow us both on X. He is at Scott Bertram with 1 T in Scott. I'm at Greg Corumbus. Jim, of course, is at Jim Garrity. Have a great Monday, great President's Day. Join us again on Tuesday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.